hundreds and perhaps thousands of pages of Talmud are linked to the laws that are taught in this week's portion. This week's portion, Mishpatim, introduces to the Jewish people and introduces to the world the laws of civil liability, civil responsibility, laws of care and concern for the next person's property, laws of care and concern about just being careful not to cause any kind of damage whatsoever to the next person. In fact, much of civil law in today's world is derived from this week's Torah portion and the pages of Talmud that emerge in discussion of these laws. Now, when you study these laws, you look at it and say, well, the laws are teaching me responsibility, the laws are teaching me obligation, the laws are teaching me when I damage, how much do I have to pay, and the laws help me figure out who is the guilty party, what is considered negligence, what is not considered negligence, and these are all very, very important details. Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz points out an amazing thought. These aren't just laws. These aren't just civil laws. These are mitzvos that are connected to the fulfillment of love your neighbor. Mitzvah number 243 of the 613 commandments, as elucidated in the Sefer HaChinuch, which is the book of 613 commandments, he says that it's an obligation to love each and every fellow Jew with the love that one has for oneself. And what this means is that we have to be concerned for every single person, for his emotion, and for his property. Just like I am concerned about my own self and my own finances, my own property, I have to be concerned for the next person's, as it is written, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so I got to be careful with my car. I got to be careful with my animal. What does my animal do to the next person? I got to be careful if I light a fire. I got to be careful, make sure it doesn't spread. If I put a briefcase down, I got to make sure somebody doesn't trip on it. Okay, yeah, these are responsibilities, legal responsibilities. No, not just legal responsibilities. This is the fulfillment of love your neighbor as yourself. And the Sefer HaChinuch continues, the laws of this mitzvah are connected, love your neighbor is connected to so many of the mitzvos of the Torah. That's why Rabbi Akiva says, love your neighbor as yourself is klal gadol, is a great principle of the Torah, because so many of the commandments of the Torah are connected, can be linked to love your neighbor as yourself. As a matter of fact, love your neighbor as yourself is a mitzvah then that can be fulfilled constantly. You know, after we make a phone call, or after we sometimes send an email or respond to something, or we call up a company, we get a survey. How would you rate this call? We really need to ask ourselves the following question. After a phone call, after a communication, at the end of every single day, rate your day. Rate the conversation. Rate the interaction. Have I fulfilled the mitzvah of love your neighbor as yourself? An extra smile, an extra care, an extra expression of concern. Sometimes we can get tired when there's another person who needs our help. But if we ask ourselves, wait a second, I have a mitzvah of love your neighbor. Is there more that I can do? Rabbi Akiva says, love your neighbor is a great principle of the Torah. I suggest that a lesson from Rabbi Akiva is, if I want to question myself about my own commitment to Torah, I need to ask myself, how do I rate in love your neighbor as yourself? Now, who would think that these laws in this week's portion of property damage and digging a ditch and my cow going out and damaging somebody, who would look at it as, well, linked to love your neighbor? But that's what our sages teach us. Love your neighbor permeates and is part and parcel of every single aspect of our lives. May Hashem help us that we can fulfill that mitzvah. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Elijah of Vilna says in the morning, before I begin my prayers to God, I need to stop to think about the mitzvah of the Hafta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor. I'm coming to pray to God. Mitzvah of love your neighbor? Yeah, that'll be in my interaction during the day. No, Rabbi Elijah of Vilna is saying, love your neighbor is so important to God that if you want to open up the gates of prayer, then really feel, love your neighbor in your heart. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. Have a fabulous Shabbos.